Hi everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Non-Monogamy. I'm Leanne. I run the page Polyphilia, which is basically a platform where I talk about my life and just share what's helped me with regard to kind of non-monogamy and polyamory and sex positivity and queerness. So basically for the next hour, I will be taking some questions in the comments, and then after that, I'll be in the Field app and joining in on a chat with you guys. So please just comment like where you're joining this live from, and I will get to kind of answering some questions when they come in. I'm in the UK at the moment. Just enjoying a nice cup of tea. Mm. And yeah, like while I wait for kind of messages to come in, figured I'd talk about like how my Valentine's Day or Valentine's week rather went last week. So I was spending my Valentine's week with my polycule. I went on a date with my boyfriend on the 14th and then my girlfriend on the 15th, and we also had a polycule hangout with like both my partners and also my metamor, so my girlfriend's husband, where we watched The Last of Us, which is a TV show that the four of us have been watching together. So that was really wholesome, and just kind of wanted to share that because Valentine's Day and Valentine's week and just this month in general is always like a really busy one for me. But like being busy is good. So yeah, like if anyone has any questions about like anything to do with non-monogamy or polyamory, just feel free to ask. Or if you want me to define those terms even, happy to answer anything to do with that. Also, yeah, like if anyone has thoughts on like kind of what they've been doing kind of this month, like with their partners, if you have any. Oh, someone just said I love The Last of Us. Yeah, it's great, right? Oh my god. Like if like for those of you who haven't seen it, if you don't watch any other show, like it just like the third episode is really really good because there's a really amazing and moving queer story, which honestly like I've watched it twice and I cried both times. Yeah, okay, loads of people from like so many different parts of the world. Oh my gosh, okay. UK, India, US, Canada. Hey, a couple of people in the UK. Hello. Austria, that's fun. All right, okay. First question. Thank you, Daniel. What would you say the difference is between poly and non-monogamy? So, basically, non-monogamy is anything that is not monogamy. Yeah, it's kind of in the name. So, like anything that is not like like a mutually exclusive relationship between kind of two people. Non-monogamy is an umbrella term that encompasses a whole range of different kind of relationships. So polyamory is one of them. But yeah, they also include kind of like swinging and kind of open relationships, kind of monogamish relationships. So polyamory specifically refers to the practice of having multiple loving relationships simultaneously with the knowledge and consent of everyone involved. So there's I guess more of a focus on kind of emotional, intimate connections, like romantic connections, I suppose, with multiple people. Whereas other types of non-monogamy, like kind of open relationships, swinging, etc., typically prioritize kind of one romantic partner, and then you have kind of casual, like sexual partners outside of that. So basically, polyamory is like a subcategory of non-monogamy, of which there are other types of non-monogamy. Polyamory is just one of them, and polyamory is the only type of non-monogamy that involves like multiple romantic relationships, while other types of non-monogamy typically have one romantic relationship and then kind of multiple sexual connections. Obviously, it's kind of on a spectrum. I kind of like to think of it like the spectrum from kind of monogamy to polyamory as like a continuum rather than kind of just discrete categories. Because different people define their boundaries in the relationship in different ways. People have different definitions of cheating, for example, like even in monogamy, right? It's a spectrum from kind of like strict monogamy and strict exclusivity to like monogamish, where kind of like outside kind of sexual activity is kind of seen as the exception rather than norm, kind of open relationships where there's a lot more kind of individual kind of exploration, but still kind of keeping things casual. Swinging is where, you and your partner kind of go to, like, have threesomes and group sex kind of recreationally with other people. And then polyamory, which is, like kind of multiple intimate kind of emotional connections. And so, that's kind of how I view it in my mind. Personally. So yeah, like, hope that helps. Non-monogamy, umbrella term. Poly is kind of one of, under that umbrella, and among other relationship styles. So let's have a look at what other questions there are. Okay. How do you deal with friends or family who don't understand your relationship preferences? Thank you, David. Kind of how do you deal with people who don't understand kind of your relationship style? I mean, like, ultimately, like, we do live in a mononormative society where kind of monogamy is very much encouraged and is, I suppose, kind of institutionalized, in terms of kind of how, like, legal marriage, like, encourages kind of monogamous relationships. And so, and we're also taught a lot of things, growing up about, like, what love and relationship should look like, right? Like the rhyme goes, like, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes a baby in a baby carriage, right? You're kind of taught that there is a progression, in your relationships where, like, if you're in love with someone, then you're expected to at some point move in with them or have kids or get married. Obviously, as time goes on, I think people are deconstructing this concept a lot more, which is called the relationship escalator. So, just like, just the progression of steps that you're expected to do to indicate kind of commitment or, like, seriousness of your relationship. Like, I think people really struggle to understand when you do that with some people, but not others, or, just the concept of, like, removing exclusivity from your relationship entirely, because, like, when you get married, like, you make a vow to forsake all others, right? And, like, kind of, for a lot of people, exclusivity is kind of the point of the relationship. Like, I see this a lot, like, when people kind of question my relationship style, they're like, well, like, if you're still seeing other people, then what's the point? Which is very bizarre to me, right? Because I think a relationship is ultimately about, like, love and connection and respect and trust, right? And communication. And none of these things require monogamy, and I think we can afford to define commitment in our own ways. Being non-monogamous is just one way, you decide to kind of commit in a relationship. So, I think, like, if, say, you're kind of coming out to family as non-monogamous, or you're trying to kind of explain kind of, like, how you do things to family or friends or loved ones, I think it's really good to kind of think in advance and prepare in advance, like, what they might say to you. For example, if you're like, I have a girlfriend and a boyfriend, or if you're like, I don't know, like, my spouse, like, has another partner, right? Like, I would think about, like, what, your audience, like, might say in response, and try and kind of, preempt, like, whatever misconceptions that they might have ahead of time, and think of answers ahead of time. So, for example, if you think that, their concern would be, but isn't that cheating, right? Isn't that the same as cheating? Then you could be like, well, no, it's not about cheating, because everyone agrees to this arrangement, and everyone knows about it and happily consents to it. And so that's the opposite of cheating, which involves dishonesty. Polyamory and non-monogamy are involved, like, the whole point is, like, honest, ethical kind of communication. Or, if someone's like, oh, aren't you concerned about STIs? Then, you could say something like, well, like, I get tested, and, like, we use protection. Or if you don't kind of want to go into that level of detail, like, that's also fine. I think there's also, like, you have to also be mindful of, like, what you invest your energy into, because there are some people who are genuinely willing to learn and, are trying to understand you. And there are some people who are just intent on attacking you, and, like, they're just kind of saying stuff to make you feel bad and aren't actually interested in listening to what you have to say. So, it's not your job to educate other people just because this is the relationship style that you practice. Like, if you don't have the energy, or if you feel that, this person isn't being particularly receptive to what you have to say, then, your time and energy could be better spent elsewhere. So it's not so much about just like, yeah, like how do you deal with these people? It's also about like, being mindful of like how much energy you want to give out to other people. Like I'm an educator, like I happily educate people about this kind of stuff. But then, sometimes in my personal life, if I have very like infuriating conversations with people, then yeah, like, sometimes like you just got to recognize when it's not going in a productive direction, right? So yeah, hope that helps. Just generally like try and think about what misconceptions they'll have in advance and think of answers in advance so you're not put on the spot like when they like say these things to you, which they probably will. And also, learn to be mindful of your time and energy and don't waste your time on conversations or kind of people who are not taking things in a productive direction, and people who are not like actually willing to learn and understand. So let's have a look at more questions now. Oh my gosh, there's been so many more since I said all that. Okay, hold on. Oh, okay, here's a very, very common question. Thank you, Phil. How do you deal with issues of jealousy in a poly or non-monogamous relationship? If I do feel jealous, does that mean non-monogamy is not a good fit for me? Great question, Phil. So yeah, I think jealousy is probably one of the questions that I get the most from people like who are unfamiliar with the concept of non-monogamy or polyamory, or who are just like new on their journey. And I think there's this misconception that like that if you feel jealous, if you are able to experience jealousy, that like you can't practice non-monogamy, and that's not true. Like jealousy is an emotion. And also, more importantly, jealousy can be caused by a wide variety of things. When I think about jealousy, I like to categorize it into kind of, in terms of like the causes of jealousy. I like to categorize them into like internal factors and external factors. And what I mean by that is, if you experience jealousy, like sometimes the reason why you're feeling jealousy is internal. For example, you may have some past trauma, or abandonment issues or insecurities that trigger your jealousy. For example, like yeah, like fearing that your partner might leave you, or that fearing that you're not good enough. Yeah, like and these things, are things that you work through and process, by yourself or with a therapist or like with your partner or partners. And yeah, and this is kind of like internal work that is really important to do. And I would say is important to do, no matter what kind of relationship you're in, right? Because like being monogamous doesn't protect you from feeling jealous. If anything, like I would say that like quite a lot of monogamous people feel jealousy all the time. And then kind of external factors would be things like, perhaps your partner isn't meeting certain needs of yours, and so you're kind of feeling a certain type of way, particularly if they're meeting those same needs that you want to be met with someone else. Or maybe you're just like like the relationship like structure that you're in, because even if you're in a non-monogamous relationship, there are lots of different ways you can do it, right? Maybe the kind of structure you're in isn't like right for you, and so you're kind of being triggered by some things more than others. Or or it could be a bunch of different life stresses, like right, like if your mental health isn't great, like if you're having a lot of kind of struggles like in other bits of your life, then you might be more susceptible to feeling jealousy than you would normally, right? So yeah, I mean, so all of these factors together, what I'm trying to say is that like jealousy is something very normal that most people experience in their life at least once. And I think there needs to be a distinction between like, feeling kind of like jealous out of like kind of like, insecurity, or like because, of the kind of circumstances that you're in, and feeling possessive, right? Because I think possessiveness is something that, if you want to kind of step into the world of non-monogamy, is something really, that you really have to unlearn, right? Which is not to say that like all monogamous people are possessive, but then I think the societal beliefs that we're taught about relationships and love, this whole thing about like, your partner completing you, or like that, like they're all yours, or like you're my world, you're my everything, etc. Like, they create like kind of these it puts you in a mindset like where like if your partner is spending time with other people, you know, you might feel a sense of entitlement to that time or entitlement to that energy, or, you know, kind of wanting to be involved in every aspect of your partner's dating life, you know, and that kind of stuff is going to make, you know, your non-monogamous journey difficult. So yeah, so like I think basically jealousy is a big nebulous topic. And so yeah, but feeling jealousy doesn't mean that, you know, non-monogamy isn't a good fit. You know, you can absolutely kind of like work on your stuff, talk to your partner, you know, maybe restructure your relationship. And it's not, you know, like not feeling jealousy is not a precursor to being kind of good at polyamory or non-monogamy. So yeah, I mean, there's like so much more that I could talk about on jealousy. I mean, you know, I could, you know, on that one topic, I could talk about it for a really long time. But yeah, if you want to check out more information on that, like, you know, just go to my page. I have an FAQ in the link in my bio where I talk about jealousy a lot more. So if that's something you're interested in, yeah, you know, my handle, you know, you can, is Polyphilia blog. But yeah, moving on to other questions. Let's have a look. Is there a go-to website to learn about non-monogamy, especially polyamory? Thank you, Jonathan. I wouldn't say so. And even if there was, I don't think that, you know, I think ultimately, like, kind of relationships are very personal. You know, and, you know, even though, like, I think kind of most kind of polyamorous people, like, they kind of preach the same principles of, like, yeah, like honesty and communication and kind of, you know, self-advocacy and respect for others and that kind of thing. You know, ultimately people are talking about their lived experience and kind of sharing what they have learned. But you know, sometimes that might not apply, right? You know, across cultures, across countries, across circumstances. Like ultimately, you do what works best for you. And as long as everyone agrees to the situation and no one's like feeling kind of displaced or hurt or, you know, just messed about, you can do whatever you want. um, but and I would also encourage people to you know, learn about polyamory and non-monogamy from a wide variety of sources, right? You know, I'm a content creator. I've been posting about non-monogamy since 2020, but I'm not the only person who does this, right? Like there are loads of other creators with different life experiences who live in different places and have different identities, you know, and who have been on very different journeys, who all have different stories to share. And so I think it's really important to, you know, like, yeah, like, you know, take in kind of people's lived experience, but then also, you know, yeah, like have some critical thinking and, you know, see kind of what applies to your own life and what doesn't, and, you know, take what's useful and leave what's not. You know, there's lots of books as well, right? Like, you know, kind of before people like me kind of came on the scene, like, and started talking about polyamory and non-monogamy online, like there have been plenty of books, you know, that have been published, right? Like The Ethical Slut's probably like the most famous one, but I mean, there have been so many more that have been published since then, you know, and only more to come. So yeah, basically, you know, I wouldn't say there's a go-to website, and even if there was, I wouldn't encourage, you know, just using one source as gospel, because yeah, relationships are very personal, and I think it's, as with anything, I think it's good to get like, yeah, like a breadth of information from different sources and from kind of different people who've walked kind of different paths in life, because yeah, you know, like you know, I kind of practice like non-hierarchical polyamory, but then, you know, there are some other people who practice hierarchy, some people who prefer swinging, some people like, you know, who like live alone and have multiple partners, you know, some people in closed triads, right? Like, you know, the possibilities are endless. And, you know, like not just with relationship styles, like with identities as well. You know, I speak from the perspective of a kind of bisexual Chinese woman living in the UK, right? But then, you know, that's my perspective. And there are many other perspectives that kind of my content doesn't include. So, you know, these are the things to take into account, right? Like, you know, you want to consume content from like a wide variety of perspectives. So let's have a look. More questions. Okay. Thank you to Coloring in the Lines. What advice would you give to someone who is opening up their relationship for the first time? So this person's not new to E&M. So when I work with individuals and couples who are exploring non-monogamy, I generally kind of ask them to think about two things. First thing is motivation. So what I mean by that is, why are you motivated to practice polyamory or non-monogamy? Like, what about this relationship style appeals to you? And, you know, like what benefits do you think it will bring to your life? And why do you want to do it, right? like, just, yeah, what is your motivation? Like, what, like, why are you bothering with all this? And the most important thing is that this motivation has to be personal to you. So, if you're only kind of exploring non-monogamy because your partner really wants to, but you kind of feel quite reluctant about it, and it's not really something that's ideal for you. I mean, nothing wrong with trying, I guess. You might try it and then realize you like it, but if over, like, like the next couple months, you're still like, I'm only doing this because I love my partner and I don't want them to leave me, you might want to rethink your position. I think it's really important that your reason for practicing non-monogamy is personal to you, whether it's because it's just what feels most natural to you, or because you enjoy the kind of variety and novelty that non-monogamy offers, or because you want to do some personal work and you feel that non-monogamy is a really great way of kind of challenging your insecurities, or because you want to explore your sexuality, whether it's like with different genders, or like with kink, right? There can be so many different reasons you want to practice non-monogamy, but they have to be personal to you. Not because you want to save a relationship, not because you like love your partner, not because you fear change or fear abandonment. Has to be something that's personal to you, and it doesn't have to be right away. But it is something, your motivation has to be something that you find eventually, because that's what you'll have to cling on to when things get hard. If things get really tough, if you're going through some challenges, you have to remind yourself, why am I doing this in the first place? Why am I bothering? Right? Because at the end of the day, like, we live in a monogamous society, and non-monogamy is unconventional, and it's something that is heavily stigmatized. And so you need to know why you're doing this, because if you don't know, or if you don't have a good enough reason for doing it, you're gonna struggle quite a lot. So first thing is motivation. The second thing is vision. So how do you envision your non-monogamous life? Yeah, what do you think it'll look like? Do you want a kind of non-hierarchical relationship, or like a hierarchical one? What does that hierarchy look like? Do you want to live with one partner, no partners, multiple partners? What about marriage? What about children? Kind of, what is that going to look like? Kind of, your setup. And I think it's really important to talk about these things, because just because you and someone else are both non-monogamous, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to practice the same type of non-monogamy. And so, yeah, it's really important to get clarity on that front. Again, not something you need to figure out right away, but just something to keep in mind and have conversations about. Because, even if you and your partner were compatible in a monogamous relationship, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have a smooth transition to non-monogamy and want to practice the same type of non-monogamy. So making sure that you are aligned on those fronts, and if you're not, then that's another conversation that you'll need to have, right? That's really important. And also just generally, like, don't rush things, right? Like, do the work. Like, you've got loads of time, particularly if you've been in a monogamous relationship for a really long time. Ultimately, you are upending the foundations of your relationship, right? Like I said earlier, a lot of people put like exclusivity as, like, the foundation of their relationship. Like the whole point. Like, I know my partner loves me because they're not seeing anyone else and they've forsaken everyone else. And yeah, like, and we're exclusive to each other. So when you take that exclusivity away, that's very disorienting for a lot of people. That's very destabilizing for a lot of people. So you have to transition from kind of getting emotional security from the structure of your relationship, like the exclusivity or the forsaking of all others, to the strength of your connection, right? Like, how emotionally attuned are you to each other? How like, yeah, like, how good are you at communication and repairing from conflict, and advocating for yourself and setting and enforcing boundaries. These are kind of relationship skills that will be challenged, because once you get more people involved, yeah, like, there's just more stuff to deal with, right? So yeah, like, just generally being aware of kind of like kind of where you are in terms of your like relational skills is really important. And there's loads of guides out there on kind of like how to get better at like setting boundaries and kind of communicating honestly. Like I really liked the books like Non-Violent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, and Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover. And yeah, like I mean there's so many books out there, or kind of accounts or like whatever, like that'll really help you on your journey. So yeah, that's kind of just general advice. But yeah, there's so much advice out there about like opening up, that you can find on my page, and yeah, loads of other sources out there. Let's have a look. Oh, great question. What is a time that you felt overly polysaturated, and what did you end up doing to balance your time management with all your partners? Thank you, Mercedes. For those of you who don't know, I just feel like I want to kind of explain this definition for people. Polysaturated, that's the adjective, polysaturation is the noun, is a phenomenon where basically you have like the maximum number of partners that you can handle. The vast majority of non-monogamous people I know kind of max out at like 2 or 3, I don't want to say serious partners, but I suppose kind of partners that you would put like a lot of time and energy investment into. Yeah, and like once you reach that polysaturation point, then you're like, okay, this is the point where I perhaps like won't invest time into kind of building new relationships, or maybe I'll kind of keep new connections kind of casual or like one-off or whatever, and because you want to uphold your existing commitments to the relationships that you've already got. And it would be irresponsible to continue like dating more people and making your existing partners feel very disoriented and unsure about like how much time or energy that you can give them, right? Because ultimately relationships are work, and if you have multiple relationships, you need to put in the work to maintain them and make the commitments. So referring to the kind of point I made earlier about how you define commitment very differently in a non-monogamous relationship. For me, I think commitment in non-monogamy looks like making promises and following through on those promises. These may be promises to do with like respecting whatever relationship agreements you've got, or the amount of time that you've committed to spending with each other every week or every month or whatever, what have you. Basically that's kind of polysaturation. It's kind of a nerdy kind of chemistry term that kind of got brought into the polyamorous community. And yeah, it just kind of basically means like kind of reaching your limit. Polysaturation could also happen if you have other stuff going on in your life. Like for example, I had a friend who was polysaturated with one partner because they were doing a PhD. And the PhD took up so much of their time that it was basically like having another partner. If you have a family member who is like struggling with illness and you need to look after them, or if something is going on at work that's really stressful, or like whatever else, like you have a passion project, you're writing a book, whatever. Like polysaturation like isn't just kind of about like how many relationships you're balancing, but also just like within the context of we all have 7 days in a week and 24 hours in a day, like how much time and energy do you have left, and kind of balancing that, all those responsibilities you have to multiple things, like not just your partners. So that's the kind of explanation of polysaturation. What is the time I felt overly polysaturated? What did you end up doing to balance your time management? So I think like there was a period of time in my early non-monogamous journey, and I think everyone goes through this to some degree before you kind of figure out like what your like kind of sweet spot is. Where I was like, oh my god, I can date all the people. I'm gonna go and date all the people. You go on a ton of dates, and then before you know it, there's like, I don't know, like 7 different people who want like a second date with you, and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Like, because I can't see all these people at the same time. And yeah, like it's about like kind of figuring out like your capacity, and it does take trial and error, and yeah, like people make mistakes, and that's okay. It's more about kind of like learning from those mistakes and then kind of taking them into the future, right? Whereas I feel like now, if I feel like I'm kind of reaching kind of polysaturation, then I'll turn off my dating apps kind of temporarily. I'll like, or if I still kind of continue like swiping on dating apps, I might kind of put in my bio somewhere that yeah, like I'm only looking for casual connections right now, or I'm looking for something kind of relatively infrequent because I see my other partners a certain number of times a week. So like that will let people know that if they're looking for something like really kind of like serious that requires quite a lot of time investment, I might not be the person for them. But if someone's like looking for a hookup, or kind of looking for something casual, or someone's like traveling, right, then we might be a better match. At the moment, like I have two partners, and I'm also kind of, I guess, kind of sort of building a closer connection with my metamor. We'll see how that goes. And so, yeah, like I'm pretty polysaturated at the moment, and I haven't been on, like, well, I still go on dates occasionally, but I'm not like actively looking in the same way that I was before. I might have the occasional threesome or foursome, like either by myself or like, with a partner joining another couple. Or yeah, like, I might like kind of hook up with someone who's, in town, right? But uh yeah, like it's about kind of being realistic about your time, basically, and kind of setting expectations with new people that you meet, so that they are able to consent to entering into like the arrangement, eyes wide open, and yeah, like knowing what you have to offer and deciding whether they're okay with that. So like if you've kind of reached a point where you're polysaturated and you're like, oh no, I've overpromised, I would suggest like talking to the people that you're seeing and being like, hey, I realized I've kind of, like oversubscribed, basically. And kind of what are you looking for, in this connection? And kind of hopefully, through these questions, you might be able to kind of whittle it down a little bit. But then if you end up connecting with all these people just by chance, then kind of see how it goes. And like yeah, check in with yourself, take some time out for self-care, right? Be upfront with the people that you're seeing about kind of your energy levels and kind of, yeah, like time capacity and that kind of thing. And yeah, eventually kind of things will balance themselves out. It usually kind of works out that way. Best of luck. All right, let's have a look. Let's see. How do you practice healthy boundaries and healthy communication strategies in your polycule? Thank you, Russell. So, I mean, I think this is quite a broad question, but I wanted to touch on it because I think that practicing kind of healthy boundaries and kind of communication strategies is something that's really important in all types of relationships, not just polyamorous or non-monogamous ones. And like, yeah, like I think relationships are kind of a way, like, for us to kind of see like what we need to work on, right? Like relationships are kind of almost kind of mirrors to our souls in a way, because yeah, like like you have to kind of communicate with people and like express your needs and kind of set boundaries, and more importantly enforce those boundaries. And so I guess, I think it's about being able to say things like in the moment rather than kind of bottling things up and then letting them kind of turn into resentments that kind of come out later. I try to be as proactive as possible, like when it comes to kind of, like, yeah, communication within my polycule, and I don't let things fester. And I think my partners do the same thing. Like if there was something that kind of bothered me about an interaction that we had, or, like something that like I wanted to change, I'd usually bring it up like within a couple days, if not like within the same day. I'd find a moment and check in, and yeah, and express my feelings. And like there's a time and a place for these things, obviously, and I think it kind of also varies like by according to the individual. But yeah, like I think kind of being able to preempt kind of these conversations and having them regularly is a really good way to ensure that like things don't kind of build up over time and then kind of become too big for you to deal with. um like some people do like regular relationship meetings, like once a month. Like some of you who may listen to the Multi-Amory podcast, they have like a resource called Radar. Can't remember what it stands for, but it's basically a communication tool, like for you to kind of have regular check-ins with your partners. And I think that's really great. I think like having like, regular meetings to kind of talk about different aspects of your relationship is like really good for kind of maintaining it. And making sure that there are no unspoken resentments or things left unsaid, right? But I think it's also good to just, check in often. I really don't think there is, such a thing as like over communication. And um, the more you talk about it, the more normal it will be to kind of bring up concerns ahead of time, and advocate for yourself, and like kind of yeah, just get used to like honing these skills. Um, yeah, hope that helps. um, let's have a look. Da-da-da-da-da. Hmm. Oh, this is a great question. Thank you, Cicadia. What advice do you have for someone who wants to practice non-hierarchical polyamory, but has financial entanglement and children with a partner? So here's the thing about hierarchy. Like similar to jealousy, I think it's quite like a nebulous topic in the non-monogamous community because just like how kind of different people define like jealousy in different ways and kind of jealousy can be caused by so many different things. Like hierarchy is another huge topic within the polyamorous community, and I feel like there isn't like a fixed definition for like what people mean when they are referring to hierarchy. So, for me, like I think there are different types of hierarchies. Like I think there are kind of structural hierarchies in relationships that are, sometimes not even through kind of like fault of our own, right? Like, obviously there's kind of things like if you are married to someone, or if you live with someone, or if you have children with someone, or if you have like a sharing a mortgage with someone, right? Um, like these are kind of like structural hierarchies that mean that, on certain things, like that partner that you're doing that with, you know, like their opinion and their like say is going to matter more than partners who you're not doing that with, right? Like, for example, like if you've got a kid, and you have co-parenting responsibilities, right? And you like there's a crisis at home and your co-parent calls you up and is like, hey, like our baby's sick, really need you tonight, really sorry, but like can we sort something out because I can't do this on my own, right? Then yeah, like like that's gonna have to take priority in a situation like if like your kids are ill or in danger or whatever, right? And your co-parenting partner like would like their say would kind of take priority in that particular situation. And so I think there are kind of things like on a structural level that you need to be upfront about like with your partners, right? um so that's kind of structural hierarchy. And then I think the hierarchy that most people in the non-monogamous community are referring to, like when they talk about these things, is kind of like emotional hierarchy. And what I mean by that is like kind of affirmations that like, no matter how many people you're with, like I'm the person that you're most emotionally connected to, or that I'm your best lover, I'm your hottest partner, I'm your cleverest partner, like what I'm the best in every way. And to affirm that you are not allowed to go or like have sleepovers with your other partners, or like like I only get Valentine's Day and birthdays, and yeah, like like I kind of want to maintain my primacy in that sense, or I have the power to force you to end your relationships with your other partners, like, and it's kind of these things that get kind of nebulous because I think to a certain degree, I think kind of practicing polyamory in particular is about having like the autonomy to kind of structure your relationships, and obviously like kind of within reason, right? You have to balance like the needs and of multiple partners, and you have to kind of figure out something that works for everyone involved. But then if you're kind of imposing like a certain level of kind of control like over a relationship that you're not in a polyamorous community, that's generally a no-no. And so yeah, kind of what I want to say is that like when you talk about hierarchy, like what do you mean, um because I don't think there's anything wrong with being married or living with someone or having children, right? Like you wanted to do these things with your partner, that's a kind of level of entanglement that you consented to, great, but you have to be honest with people about like what that means, right? You may not like your partner may not have the ability to kind of force you to break up with your other partners, or ban you from kind of going on holidays with them or sleepovers or like whatever it is, right? But then they're like they would have to be prioritized in situations involving your home, or your children, right? And that's just a structural reality that, I think would be irresponsible to ignore. So, I think it's like, um, yeah, the hierarchy conversation is like a difficult one. And, and I think like at the end of the day, we live in a society that encourages monogamy. And even if you like had a situation like where, like everything was kind of like equal, so to speak, you know, like couple privilege is a thing, like people might recognize the partner that you've been with for the longest, or like like heterosexual partnership more than like a homosexual partnership, right? People will put their own kind of projections and lenses onto things, and that's something that's out of your control. So I think it's just about being aware of these structural realities, being upfront with people about that, and otherwise trying to not do things that will be to the detriment of your other relationships. Yeah, that's kind of how I navigate hierarchy in my relationship anyway. Um, this also just a friendly reminder with kind of 20 minutes left of the live stream that after this call, I will be jumping on a group chat. So, the group chat is being hosted in the Field app. If you haven't joined it yet, someone on the Field team will put the link to join the chat in the comments. So yeah, like you can join me after this live stream there, and yeah, we can talk about everything that we've been discussing here and more. So okay, let's have a look at some more questions. Oh my gosh, so many. Oh, okay. Thank you, Sydney. Why do you think there is such an explosion of interest in E&M or poly or non-monogamous relationships now? I think okay, I have so much to say about this. So honestly, I do think that the pandemic played a significant role in the explosion of interest in non-monogamy. And I think I think about like something that the Belgian psychotherapist and speaker Esther Perel talked about in a TED talk that she did some time ago, where she said something along the lines of desire like being the antidote to death. And kind of what she meant by that was like she saw how when people had been through a lot of trauma or there had been a lot of tragedy and death kind of and stuff like that going on around them, they were much more likely to kind of think about like their own mortality, and therefore like, have I made all the decisions that I wanted to make? Have I made all the choices that kind of fulfill me the most in life? Is this it? Is there more? And like, and I think non-monogamy, like the rise in interest in non-monogamy is related to the pandemic, because during the pandemic a lot of people had to confront their own mortality, and think about like like, is there more to life? Like, have I like, if everything ended tomorrow, kind of do I kind of regret the path that I have chosen? And so it's the same reason why like I so many people around me like realized that they were queer, or came out as trans, or like kind of changed jobs, or like whatever, and made a lot of kind of different life changes like during the pandemic. I think it was a bit of a reckoning for quite a lot of people, because there was so much change going on. So yeah, like I think when you're kind of confronted with like, oh, like there's so much more to life and I want to experience more, kind of non-monogamy becomes like quite a logical conclusion to that, right? And I mean, I'm also willing to bet that there's a small minority of people who opened up their relationships after the pandemic after being kind of just stuck at home with their spouse or partner for an extended period of time. Obviously that's a thing that happens, but then like I do think that kind of those two events are linked, for me. So I think that, but also the people are more open-minded than they used to be, right? Like I think that the gay rights movement and kind of the trans rights movement like have kind of paved the way for kind of people of different identities, and kind of sexualities, to be kind of accepted, and obviously while kind of non-monogamy is like a slightly different kettle of fish, I think like because non-monogamy and queerness are also quite like closely tied, like in terms of like their shared history, right? Like those movements paved the way for non-monogamous people to gain kind of acceptance like in kind of the wider world. So I think it was like a combination of things, and also like I think like desire and kind of desire like outside of a relationship kind of being acknowledged more as a phenomenon, people being able to kind of openly talk about like how like the beliefs that we've grown up with about love and relationships may not be the healthiest, even in kind of monogamous discourse, right? And so yeah, like I think for some people like kind of that led to the logical conclusion of like opening up their relationship. And also, like I think like people are living longer and like with kind of the way of with like exchange of information in the digital world and etc. Like I think it's like people are just presented with like a wider range of options than they used to in the past, and so you know I think that kind of it's a combination of factors, but like loosely I think kind of everything I mentioned is like why it was a bit of a perfect storm for like non-monogamy and polyamory to like be like such a thing now. Like I started my page in 2020, and honestly, like my page, its popularity just skyrocketed in a very short space of time. And I do think, yeah, like people were thinking about these things and having these conversations. So yeah, that's my take on it anyway. um, let's see. Um, oh, okay. Thank you, Just JR. How do you handle going through periods when you're not interested in romantic relationships as a non-monogamous person? I guess I feel like I should be, but I'm not, and I've also not been in one in forever. I mean, just because you identify as non-monogamous or polyamorous, it doesn't mean that you have to actively be in multiple relationships or even one relationship. Just like monogamous people go through periods where they're like, yeah, living the single life. Non-monogamous people can do that too. Like it's like being kind of polyamorous or non-monogamous. Like I see it as a mindset rather than like as a kind of descriptor of what your relationships currently look like. Just like how like a single person, you know like a person isn't asexual just because they have no partners, or like a bisexual person isn't straight just because they're dating someone of a different gender, right? Like in the same way, like a non-monogamous person or polyamorous person, they don't stop being polyamorous just because they have one relationship or no relationships. Like you are still non-monogamous no matter how many partners you have, whether it's like 1 or 0 or 5, right? It's like the kind of the way that you live life, like the mindset that you put yourself in, and the kind of philosophy that you subscribe to, at least for me. So yeah, like if you're at a time in your life where you're not interested in romantic relationships at the moment, that's okay. Look, loads of people go through that. It's not unique to, and it doesn't strip away your like non-monogamous label. When you feel ready to get back into it, then do. And if you don't, cool, maybe then explore a different label. But like until then, I wouldn't worry too much about it. There's no kind of shoulds about these things. Like it's yeah, you don't have to be in a relationship to affirm to other people that you're non-monogamous, and you don't have to have multiple partners, or a partner of different genders or whatever, like to affirm your sexuality in any way. You can do what you want, do what makes you happy. Like if you've got other stuff in your life going on right now, or yeah, if you just don't want to invest your energy in that right now, that's fine. Like take a break. And it would be, like if you're not feeling it and you get into dating even though you're not feeling it, that would be irresponsible. And that would be, somewhat unethical, which I think is against the principles, right? Like you want to go into it enthusiastically and knowing kind of what you want and being able to express yourself honestly with partners, right? So, if you're not feeling it, don't do it. That's okay, and yeah, just take your time and get back into it when you want to. Let's have a look at more questions. Oh my gosh. So many. Thank you, Kurt Zimmer. Are physical barriers like condoms the standard in the poly world, or is testing widely considered adequate? I think this is going to depend on kind of the community that you're in and where you live and that kind of thing. But however, whenever I talk about kind of sexual health in non-monogamous relationships, because like I'll be real with you, on my platform, I get people telling me all the time, all kinds of triggering things about STIs, or that like, I'm going to die of AIDS one day, or like whatever. People kind of spew all kinds of vitriol in my direction, and people always assume that like if you're non-monogamous, you're sexually irresponsible and you're riddled with STIs. Not true. There was a study conducted in 2015 that I love to quote. I quote it all the time. A study that was conducted in 2015 by Dr. Justin Lehmiller. You can look this up. where basically he tested the correlation, whether there was a correlation between like your relationship style, as in like monogamous or non-monogamous, and like your like the frequency with which like you like contracted STIs and kind of your sexual health practices and that kind of thing. And basically, it was found that there was no difference in like STI infection rates between monogamous and non-monogamous people. And why? Two reasons. The first reason is because it was found that people who identified as non-monogamous were more likely to use protection, to communicate with their partners, like if they did contract an STI, so it wouldn't, spread, and get tested regularly. And then the second reason was because the people who identified as monogamous were not very good at being monogamous, like in the sense that 25% of the people in the group cheated, and when they cheated, they were less likely to use protection. So then, and because you're expected to be with one partner as a monogamous person, like if you sleep with someone else and you catch something from them, you're less likely to tell your partner that you slept with someone else and caught something. And and particularly if you didn't use protection, you're more likely to pass it to your other partners and infect more people, right? So, it was a combination of factors that meant that, like, even though like non-monogamous people have, on average, more sexual partners, because of the way that monogamy is often applied incorrectly, it ended up kind of balancing out. So I think, like, when you're open with your partners about like how much sex you're having, or how many partners that you have, or like what kind of practices that you have with them, or how often you're getting tested, like, if you're open about having these conversations, people are much more likely to be able to kind of assess their level of risk, to kind of consent to the arrangement, right? Like, and yeah, like, because having multiple partners is kind of very much like widely kind of accepted. Like, yeah, like you have these open conversations, and I think you keep each other safe in that way. I don't know, I wouldn't kind of make a generalization as to say like what is the standard, but I would say like, I mean, regular testing and using protection is encouraged, right, in the community, as it is kind of just generally. But obviously, different people have like different like kind of boundaries when it comes to like how much risk they want to expose themselves to, or how much protection that they want to use. And this is going to depend on the individual. Like, some people just use condoms, some people use condoms and dental dams, some people like use gloves for fingering, right? Like, I would say generally, like, if everyone should be getting tested every 6 months, no matter what kind of relationship you're in, monogamous or polyamorous or non-monogamous. And if you have kind of more frequent kind of sexual partners, then maybe like once every 3 months, or after each partner, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, consult a medical professional for these things. Obviously, I'm just kind of saying like what I do. Yeah, hope that helps. Like, I think like sexual health is definitely something that is like a big topic in the non-monogamous community, because yeah, like we tend to have more sexual partners, and that means like with more freedom comes more responsibility, and you can't afford to be reckless with these decisions, because you're impacting multiple people. And the kind of the general principles of like honesty, communication, and yeah, like respect for boundaries and that kind of thing, like they apply in kind of sexual health as well. Yeah. So okay, let's see, we have 7 minutes left. So let's have a look at what other questions there are. Thank you for everyone for like the being so active in the chat, by the way. This is great. Oh my gosh, so many. Okay, quick question, because I feel like I didn't explain this earlier. Thank you to Sabbat and Destroy. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Just the question: solo polyamory? Question mark. In a relationship with yourself? Question mark. So yeah, I understand your confusion. I think solo polyamory is a very specific term. It's a type of polyamory where someone prefers to maintain like an independent, or some might say like single, like lifestyle, while also maintaining kind of multiple intimate connections. So basically kind of what it looks like, or more often than not, is like someone may have kind of multiple romantic relationships, but they don't want to participate in the relationship escalator. So to remind you, the relationship escalator, what I talked about earlier, about like the kind of the steps that you take, that you're expected to take to prove commitment or seriousness in a relationship. So someone might want to have multiple loving relationships, but they don't want to live with any of them, or don't want children with any of them, or don't want to get married. And they very much value their own autonomy and independence. And yeah, you don't have to live with someone to prove that you love them, right? Like, and so it's not so much like I suppose it is about being in a relationship with yourself, but I would argue that anyone, like no matter what kind of relationship style you practice, it's really important to check in with yourself and have a good relationship with yourself, in order to kind of, relate like healthily with other people, right? But yeah, like solo polyamory, broadly speaking, yeah, is someone who kind of values their independence and autonomy, but and doesn't wish to participate in certain elements of the relationship escalator, but still, maintains kind of like multiple connections. And, they can be very long term, they can be very serious. It's just that commitment in those relationships is going to look a little bit different. Hope that helps. So let's have a look. Yeah, okay. There's loads of really good discussion going on in the chat right now about like hierarchy and priority and kind of like how that works. And it shows just like how like huge the topic is, right? Because yeah, people have very different definitions of these things, and some people categorize in a different way than I do, right? What I've said is just my take on the matter. Okay, yeah. Great question from So We Go. What do I do when I have trouble with my partner dating people that I also know? Because it also affects my relationship with that other person, which I find hard. Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to depend on the individual. I personally have no problem with my partner like dating kind of like my friends, for example, but I might have a bit more of a problem with them dating, I don't know, my family members or my coworkers or something like that, because yeah, that would complicate my relationship with them like quite significantly. So yeah, like this really depends, because like some people are more comfortable with it than others. And if it is your boundary that like you don't want to have a partner who like dates people that you also have a close relationship with, or like a like a professional relationship with, or a familial relationship with, right? That's okay to say. Like if that's something that you're like you genuinely just like don't want in your relationship, it's okay to say that. But like whether your partner still chooses to date that person is up to them. And then in that scenario, then you'll have to decide whether this relationship is still for you. Like I think it's okay to kind of communicate your needs and kind of set boundaries, and then it's up to your partner to decide whether they want to respect your boundaries, or whether your boundaries kind of clash with theirs, and in which case, maybe you have a fundamental incompatibility arising. I don't think like, I like for the most part, like you can have whatever boundaries you want, and it's not that anyone's boundaries are wrong. It's just that they may be incompatible with you specifically. But of course, also like at the same time, like if you wish to kind of maintain a relationship, but you're finding it very difficult that your partner is, dating someone that you know very well, have a conversation with them. Like, what about it? Kind of, what are you worried about happening? Like, if it affects your relationship with that other person, like in what ways, and can the three of you kind of like sit together and like have a conversation about like what that might look like for you, because yeah, like it's going to affect things like yeah, for example, if they're dating your best friend, and your best friend is now not only your best friend but also your metamor, which is the term for your partner's partner. Yeah, like what's that going to look like? How is that going to change things? What are you worried about happening? What kind of what do you want to prevent, I suppose? And like how likely do you think these things are going to happen? And yeah, like what can you do about it? Do you need reassurance? Like, do you kind of just need like to be like in a different relationship? Like, do you like yeah, like what's your ideal situation, I suppose? So yeah, I mean, like without more detail, like I can't kind of give more specific advice, but kind of generally speaking, like it's okay to kind of have a boundary against kind of your partner dating certain people. That's fine. But like not everyone's going to agree to that, and that just means that they're not compatible with you. Yeah. So okay. Unfortunately, I think that's all the time that we have left. Yeah, with like literally 1 minute to go. So all I'm going to say now is that I'm going to be heading over to the Field app, and I'm going to be in the chat talking with you all about everything that we just discussed and more. So yeah, if you want to continue this conversation, then I think the Field team are definitely going to post a link to join the group chat soon. There we go. And yeah, so hop on and join me there, and I'll see you there. But yeah, thank you so much for joining this discussion with me and asking such wonderful questions. Really enjoyed this past hour. Yeah, and I'll see you for the next hour as well, just on a different platform.